Mr. Rose is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Hill, and thanks to Chairman McHenry for holding this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us today. Mr. Allen, earlier this year, ISS, the largely unregulated German-owned proxy advisory firm, announced a new, quote, board-aligned voting policy, unquote. An ordinary reading of the name board-aligned would suggest that under this policy, ISS would recommend votes in line with how a company's board would vote. But that's not exactly true under the policy. So, Mr. Allen, could you explain how the name of ISS's new policy is misleading?
Thanks for the question. And no, certainly when we first heard about this new policy, and it came out right after the group of Republican attorney generals wrote letters to ISS and Glass Lewis expressing their concerns about the lack of alignment with the fiduciary duty of investors. I heard somebody from another organization refer to it as a red state voting policy. But upon closer review, and we compared it to the ISS benchmark policy, we found that with the exception of a handful of environmental and social proposals, the policy was essentially identical to the ISS benchmark policy, including ISS policies on board diversity, on executive compensation, takeover defenses. So somebody voting, opting for this policy through that's an ISS client would be misled if they thought they were opting to have their shares voted in accordance with management recommendations or board recommendations. So we wrote a letter to ISS expressing our concern. We also shared it with the SEC and members of this committee. And in our view, this is something the SEC should be concerned about. The SEC is doing a rulemaking on fund names, and in the proxy advisor context, these custom or specialty policies are like ISS's main product. So we think it should have an accurate name and not something misleading like borderline.
Thank you. Mr. Allen, is ISS transparent about the criteria that it uses to determine whether a company's environmental and social disclosures are adequate?
The ISS, to its credit, does do an annual policy survey, but other aspects of their policy setting are less than transparent. Certainly, some of their policies on executive compensation, equity plans, they don't fully disclose their methodology because they want, companies to buy their subscription services. So, on some matters they are, some matters they aren't. I mean, it's a mixed bag, but certainly we think that there should be more transparency. ISS should provide more time for companies and others to comment on their proposed policies every year. Usually it's a short period of time, and that there could certainly be improvements in that area.
Thank you. Mr. Copeland, I'd like to discuss the overlap between the SEC's rulemaking on climate-related disclosures and the SEC's recent staff legal bulletin 14L, and time is short, so I'm going to try to move fast. Mr. Copeland, is it true that the SEC's rulemaking on climate-related disclosures requires large publicly traded companies to disclose Scope 3 emissions if they have made climate-related targets or commitments?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Copeland, under the SEC's recent staff legal bulletin 14L, significant social policy issues like climate-related proposals no longer need to have a nexus between an individual company and the policy to be included in a proxy statement. Do you believe this will make it easier for climate-related commitment proposals to make it onto a company's proxy statement?
Yes, and it already has.
Thank you. I tie these changes together because climate activists like As You Sow are trying to make it more likely that companies make climate-related commitments and thus must disclose Scope 3 emissions under the climate disclosure framework. I'll note that As You Sow alone has filed 25 climate commitment-related proposals this year. Mr. Allen, one of the bills attached to this hearing would eliminate the significant social policy issue exception to the ordinary business exclusion in Rule 14A 8I7. Can you discuss why SEC staff should not be making subjective judgments about whether a particular shareholder proposal is a significant social policy issue?
We think that's an entirely subjective analysis, and it's beyond the SEC's mandate to make such determinations.
Thank you. I see time is short, so I yield back